Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Azriel, and as usual, I got my boy Anthony here with me.
What's up? What's up?
We're Accursed Brew, and today we're going to have a conversation about Avowed. Now, just to give a quick bit of context as to what our A Conversation About series is, we primarily use this to give soft reviews about games, although that's going to branch out a little bit in the future. So you can expect that from this. But along with that, we will be spoiling pretty much the entire game. I will not be holding back, and I don't think Anthony will be. So if you want to avoid those spoilers, maybe go check out our first impressions video instead, where a lot of the opinions that we have are pretty much going to be the same here, just giving a bit more context to them in terms of how they like how the story and the gameplay and things like that throughout the game sort of changes that a little bit. But without further ado, I wanted to start this off with the question for Anthony, but also for you guys too watching this. What would you rate the game, and what did you think about where the story started, kind of where it went, and then how it ended up?
Yeah, so I was pretty I think we are pretty much in agreement here, like a strong 8 out of 10, as in a very good game, and I enjoyed it a lot. There was a lot of things preventing it from being perfect to me, but I still think it was worth 100% of the time that I put into it. I don't think I wasted any time or should have been playing anything else. I wanted to keep going back and playing it. I wanted to finish it. Um, and as for the story, I think if you've played other Obsidian style games, the writing is very similar, and they do a lot of lore building and world building and allowing you to feel like a part of a already living, breathing world and not just, the hero and this and that. Like you're pretty important, but the world has lived without you and will continue living on past you. It's not a microcosm of just your character story. It's about your character moving through this world that's already there. And I think they did a wonderful job, like setting that up at the beginning. Like you're the envoy for the Empire and or the Emperor, and you get to pick your background and all that stuff. Standard RPG character building stuff opens pretty normally for an RPG, in my opinion, I think. And then it kind of quickly expands into okay, you're dealing with the gods and certain political aspects of, different townships or villages, whatever you want to call them, throughout the region, and what they want versus what the empire wants for them. Very, very well put together. And overall, I think it was a I would say the story is like an 8 out of 10 as well, if we're gonna give like review points to everything as we go down, all our little what you call
Like a
little
checklist.
points of emphasis. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think it started pretty good for me. I wasn't like super involved or super sucked in, but it was enough to keep me going because the mechanics of the game were good as well. And then it just continued getting better and better and more interesting and very much so the D&D style, everything is not as it seems. You have to look deeper and decide for yourself what these people's and God's motivations are and how they're using you in their plans. Um, but I don't know. How about you? What was your opinion on the story?
Yeah, so man, when it comes to my thoughts, I really don't disagree with literally well, I mean, I guess you kind of outlined it, so it's hard to disagree with anything that you said. But I would definitely
Yeah,
say
the story's a story. You're playing an RPG and
yeah.
it's a video game. What do you think, Azzy? Do you agree?
Yeah. No, but a lot of the opinions that you intertwine and things like that, like I definitely agree. Even on the score too, 8 out of 10 for the broad game in general, right? And then the story in particular. There is, I mean, like you said, it's an Obsidian, so it's like an Obsidian game, and so those trends really tend to follow, especially when it comes to a lot of the characters just being sort of there to give you exposition about what's going on. Yeah, there's just so much lore in the game. There's so much that's going on around you, and as you said, you're not necessarily the focal point, right? A lot of what's happening in this area is also dictated by the main antagonist of the game. I think I would pronounce her name Ludwin, Lodwin. They said it so many times. You think I would have latched on.
Lodwin.
You think I would have latched onto it, but yeah, I mean, she's like a huge driving factor as well. There is a lot of political sort of infighting among the people within the second area, especially because of the animancy that's going on and sort of the influences that it has on the land. And then that becomes kind of a wider subject too as you approach the end of the game, where the god of that area is very much in tune with the nature, and animancy itself is sort of a
The
bastardization.
antithesis of that, yeah.
Yeah, it's like they're taking advantage of it. They're molding it in the ways that they like. They're, consuming souls to do things that you probably shouldn't be doing, right? There's like a wider conversation to be had there about the morality behind animancy in general in the world of pillars, or Aora, whatever you'd call it. Um, so it's like they give you a lot of like contrast between that. And what's beautiful too about this story, and what I really, really appreciate about what Obsidian does with their games, is you can very much walk into this with the intention of role playing a particular kind of character. And
Yeah, which I think we both did.
yeah, exactly. And you can't get like hyper super specific with exactly what you want your traits and attributes and things like that of your RP character to be. But like broadly speaking, you could hit a lot of the strokes that you want. Starting off, I was very much somebody who was, I was sent here to do a job. I'm in tune with my military. This is what I'm doing, and I'm about
You
getting the
were
job
a
done.
like a war hero or a war veteran or something was the starting.
Yeah, that was the starting one that I picked, and then sort of like
Yeah,
just my own personal take on that as well.
yeah.
And you got to play that out throughout, the majority of the game, and then as the secrets behind the god of that land was sort of unraveled, Sapado or Seps, I think it was Sapado.
Stapidal,
Yeah,
Stapidal.
as that was unraveled, I started to see my character shift from, "Hey, like this is my job," to, "Hey, this is actually like my people. This is like my god. This is where I come from." And
Giving you the answers that your character didn't have at the beginning of the game.
exactly, it's like contextualizing a world that you lived in that you didn't feel like you belonged in, and that to me
100%.
is what that character was, and so the game allowed me to cater to that, to where I started off as this hard ass just military head, and then I sort of transitioned into somebody who was very much becoming more in tune with their own people, with their own religion, their own god, and things like that, and sort of fighting on their behalf, and then fighting for on the behalf of the people that live there. As you started to grow and understand them, it became less of something of where you're just trying to take over the land, and more where you get the opportunity to say like, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't colonize these people. Maybe that would be a good thing. Maybe we should let them do their own thing." Um,
Yeah.
and then even too, the last thing I'll say too, is towards the end of it, you get options to sort of choose how do I put this? Like whether or not you want the Ader Empire to kind of come in and take over, whether you want them to be like trade friendly with the people of the Living Lands, or whether you want the Living Lands to just be completely independent on their own.
Yeah.
And that like feels like a really powerful decision, because you pretty much spend the entire game working with people who kind of lie into one of these three camps, or I guess maybe a
And they
fourth.
strongly feel about their opinions and who what's right and what's wrong for the living lands too.
Yeah, and they reinforce that through their actions, through the quests that you take, through a lot of the like little notebooks and journals and things like that scattered
How
around.
they react to how you complete certain quests and different routes you take to do certain things.
Yeah, dude, and I love that, because at the end of the game, you sort of see all of those characters come together to sort of fight against Lodwyn and the Ader Empire coming on, and you're presented with that choice of who do you want to aid in this fight, and you get to hear basically everybody saying like, "Hey, this is what I fucking thought about your actions," like "fuck you," or like, "Hey, I really appreciate what you did for my people here," and
Yeah.
things like that. I don't know, it feels really redeeming knowing that like I watched a review before talk about how they didn't feel like there was much choice in this game, if any. And to be honest, I couldn't
I
disagree
think that's
more.
completely false. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think this game has not only so much choice, but so much variance in the choices it gives you at so many different conjectures in the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what this game is. Now, are you gonna have a choice that changes like the landscape of the land and all this and that? Like, not necessarily.
A
Are you
few times.
true. There are a few times.
Yeah, a few times there are some major decisions that you have to make.
Yeah, but
And
is it
that's not even just like the end game. That's like throughout the game.
it's one of those things where I think, and this is less me giving my opinion and more just like how I think other people view choice in video games as, right? More often than not, you're pretty much going to get from A to B. You're going to start off at A and get to B, or like, you know, B.1 or B.2, if that makes any sense. Like it's more or less the same ending, it's just kind of slight variations, but it's a lot of the dialogue that really makes that feel uniquely significant. Um, and I don't know, I think this is a game where if you feel like you can see choice in more than just like widespread actions, and more specifically in what people have to say and in the reactions of I guess some of the lesser folk. This is something where you'll get a lot of appreciation out of it. It really lets you RP, really lets you feel like you're playing an actual role. um, rather than what a lot of other games, I guess, kind of are. A lot
100%.
of other RPGs rather.
If you don't mind me interjecting, I think we had very it's interesting the path that you took, with your war hero and how you were playing at first and how you kinda turned, because I almost did the opposite, where it was because I was like the court augur, which is like the court mystic, if you're unfamiliar. Um, I was basically my character's background was it was a fortune telling gypsy in a town that got ran out because I knew too much and like people were freaked out. And then the court took me in, or the emperor took me in, and I became like one of his close confidants. Um, I went in like because I was into the mystic stuff, going, cool, this voice in my head that's telling me to do stuff, I'm gonna do it because like there must be a reason that it's reaching out to me, like as that type of character, you know? And then towards the end of the game, as I was going and realizing what Sapidal was, how she was the source of this dream scourge, and they telegraph it pretty early on too. Um, I mean, honestly, you could tell right away for the most part because it's a voice talking to you in a land that's like about the dream scourge is taking it over and it's nature, quote unquote. Mushrooms are growing out of the dream scourge people and all that. Um, it pretty obviously telegraphed it, at least to me, what Sapidal was, or Sapidal was the source of it. I don't know about for you. So, like, as I was moving through the game and my character was discovering more about the Dream Scourge, I became less trustful of Sapidal and started calling her out more in the conversations. And then at the end, I had like a real like dilemma. Like, I thought about like keeping her locked up, and then I was like really sitting at that screen for a little bit and thinking, going through like all my options, and then I went back to, you know what, she's just a baby, she's just a kid, like, and she lashed out, she threw a tantrum, and she doesn't know her powers yet because the other gods cast her out and didn't teach her anything when she was born. um and I wanted to give her a chance at redemption because I had had so many as my character did. So I pretty much role played through the entire thing, and instead of like how you settled is like I have to protect my people, it was like, well, Sapidal, you fucked up. Like you can't do that shit again. I'm gonna give you like one chance, and I hope I'm right, type deal. And I think that choice was like a powerful choice for me. Like I actually had to sit there and think about it for a moment, not just, yep, I know I'm gonna free her when I get there, you know?
Yeah, I feel completely the same way, man. I did the same thing in the end where I gave it was to me it was less. So towards the end, you get the option of really it kind of boils down to three things. It comes down to whether you want retribution, whether you want vengeance, or you just really want them to, or the third one. I don't know if there's a single word to kind of like encompass it, but it's basically like ignoring those two paths and just giving them exactly what they want with no accountability. Right? It's
Yes.
essentially the three paths that you get. I very much as I was playing through the game, I went from again like being that war hero, very stern, very all about my military, into being somebody who gives her zero accountability and just kind of lets her do her thing, and then progressing into a retribution arc as I started to see like the overwhelming consequences of what was happening, especially when you get presented with the option between I'm going to butcher their names, but Lodwin and Ringram, the arch,
Archmage.
yeah, the
Yeah.
archmage. They present you with the choice of, hey, do we want to sever this piece of Adra that's sort of corrupting this land, or do we just want to completely destroy all of this, which would do some type of blow to Sapodala. I don't know exactly because I didn't go through with that option. I severed that piece of Adra,
Mhm.
but you get presented with that, and um, it was around that turning where it was around that point where I started to turn from the zero accountability into the more retributive sort of point of view of it. I don't even know if that's a word, because to me it
It is
just
now, baby.
damn straight. Because to me it made a lot of sense at the time that like you said, like, you get exposed to the ideas of her being kind of like a younger god, an inexperienced god, never really given that opportunity. That's kind of how I felt at that point going forward, where I was like,
And
you know what?
Wodika is such a bitch to her.
Yeah, it's just an evil. She's just evil to her in general,
I mean,
especially
if you've
her.
played Pillars, you know about Wodika. Like, you know she's like the one that needs to get checked.
Yeah, and um, yeah, I don't know. It just at that point it really dawned on me where it was like, you know what? Uh, like like you don't know any better, and like you're screwing up. I did tell you at some point as well where I thought the story was going and not necessarily where it was ending up. Like I initially started off with the idea of there's two aspects of Sapodel. because I felt like in a lot of
Mhm.
the depictions of Sapodel in sort of the art and in a lot of the backstory was you would see 2 faces of her. And then eventually you
Yes.
get to see her physical form, and half of her face is covered up by vines. And I didn't know if that was like, hyper specific where like in the backstory you would see 2 versions of her, kind of that greener version and a more purple version, and like that was what we
Mhm.
were seeing with that her physical representation. Um,
Or if the devs were just like, "This looks sick."
yeah, exactly. Like, I didn't know if I was reading into it too much, but to me, that was my initial takeaway. And then again, at that point, with the decision I made about severing the Audra that I just mentioned, is when I started to kind of lean more towards, you know what, you're just inexperienced, you don't know any better. And then, it sort of eventually led to that retribution arc. But again,
And it does sorry, it does go into why she did that too. Like it tells you like at the end, it's like, oh, it's because Wodaka was killing her children, like the godless, the civilization. Like Wodaka came through it, like and was trying to wipe out everyone on that in the living lands. And was attacking them and causing a bunch of chaos and damage. And her way of fighting back was sending out the Dream Scourge, which she didn't understand would also hurt the godless and the people in the living lands, because to her it was, oh, it's my land, it's I'm growing, it's we're being reborn as something better, because she was inexperienced and didn't know her own power.
yeah, it's a really powerful kind of story that Sapodal has throughout the game. I think with that though, I think the next good thing to jump into would be sort of just the gameplay of it, just the way combat and everything felt. Um, you know, which in this case, I don't think there's so much to be said that we haven't said already from our first impressions video. Um, where they give you a lot of options. They give you the ability to kind of mix and match quite a bit. I will admit that as the game goes on later, maybe this was because of the difficulty that I was playing on, but it felt like I didn't necessarily have much chance to do anything but play one particular style, which was like, I kind of jumped around a bit from like two handed to sword and shields, ended the game on sword and shield. But they do give you the ability to swap kits from one type of weapon to another. It just always feels that it feels like that secondary weapon is always just noticeably worse because there's not enough points to dedicate to those uh, other paths. Which uh, the reason why I bring that up is because that was an issue that I had playing through it. But they recently came out with a patch just like a day or two ago where they address that specifically, where they give you more points as you level up. I think it's maybe like 6 points or something like that more that you get, which
But
is
that's
really cool to
six
see.
six points is a massive amount in this game.
Oh my god, it's very considerable. It's nothing
That's
slight.
huge. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I thought the gameplay was pretty phenomenal otherwise, man. I mean, it feels really good. It felt like I love the charge on everything. I love being able to slow down the different ways you could sort of maneuver and then use that in conjunction with your combat, right?
Hmm.
If you're a melee class, you jump from a high enough ledge down, and you crouch midair, you can do like a punching thing on the ground or whatever, right? A grand slam. If you slide, you can slide into people and do like a slide tackle and fuck them up. It's just really fun. There's a lot of variety in it. That would be the only sort of contention I have with it is that feels like the later you go on, you're really kind of like forced into a particular play style. But again, this is pre-patch. Maybe the next patch
So
that feels different. But you tell me, man, how did you feel
I
about
do
it?
want to say I went like full magic because the court augur and all that kind of thing. I went like full magic build. I had a wand and I had my grimoire and I would cast spells and use my action bar and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I felt that as the game went on, my strategies got more varied because I had more in my arsenal to use as a mage. I learned new spells. I specced into different things. I had, at a certain point, I was doing like frost mage style, where I put a bunch into frost accumulation because every spell that you have has status effects that will affect the enemy, and that will, like the frost accumulation one, would start slowing them down as they would get more accumulated, and then it would freeze them in place. So I could, you know do a super powerful area of effect blizzard because I put a bunch of points into blizzard on an area that like the enemies when they're standing there when I'm first attacking them, it would freeze a bunch of them in place, and then as I would attack them, they would break their frost and come at me like one by one. I had like chain lightning that I would use. Fan of flames for like area of effect stuff. Like I felt as I got farther in the game, it got even better as a magic user. Um, which tracks in like a D&D setting. I mean, you're usually very limited as a mage in the start if you're like playing like think Baldur's Gate 3. Like if you do a mage until level 4, you ain't shit. But then you start getting more and more powerful and just steamrolling stuff with like insane spells that other classes wish they could have.
Yeah, I love how like like there was no humor in that at all. It was just you ain't shit. Like
You ain't like literally. You got 18 health, bitch. Deal with it.
yeah, that was so funny. But man, yeah, I have nothing that deep to say when it comes to melee combat. It was very much just like if you're two-handed, you charge and smack them over the head. If you're sword and shield, you basically just swipe as fast as you can. Like that's what it felt like. Primarily what I was doing. They didn't really feel like there was too much depth to it. There doesn't necessarily need to be. It was still fun controlling the companions and um having to make
So
sure.
I do want to say that action bar that you pull up. I don't know if we mentioned this, but it like kind of slows time down very very much, so you could like select your skills
I
and
think it
plan out.
pauses it, doesn't it?
It might pause it. I'm not sure if it completely pauses it or if it goes like, 1/100th of a speed, like that type of thing. So you really have an opportunity to like open up your action bar, hit E on your keyboard, or if you're playing on controller or whatever, and then like look through your spell book and like figure out the best course of action for what you're facing at the moment. Um, Whereas I feel like with melee, a lot of it is just bonk, 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 which there's nothing wrong with. Um, I didn't have any experience with melee in this game. I literally never used anything besides the wand and grimoire because I was having so much fun. And to me, I said this in the first impressions video that we did. To me, it felt less Skyrim and more Dishonored in the using your abilities and planning out different routes of attack and stuff like that. Because I played on normal, I didn't play on hard or anything, but it very much so, like, especially towards the end of the game when you would like move to a new area and you weren't quite upgraded to where you need to be. So you were like a couple tiers below the enemies there. You really had to think about what you're doing.
Yeah, it's not my experience. Like, to be honest, like, mine was basically once you got Giada, it was like throw up a shield, get a heal in, and then just bonk, 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 bonk. Like, that was pretty much the extent of it. The melee abilities that you got to were pretty straightforward. I will admit that the last melee ability that you got in the Ranger tree, I think that's what it's called, the second tree, um, it basically gives you like this super quick restoring stamina, really fast attack speed, and you just go like fucking crazy with it. That in conjunction with a roar that you can do as well, a power that you get from being a godless, and then one of Giada's like speed up spells, you become like an absolute machine. And that was probably the most fun I had with melee was doing all of that in conjunction together, fighting a boss and just going crazy, or just
Just
like a
melting
giant,
them, yeah.
yeah, just like a giant pack of enemies. It was really really fun. I will admit that early on, I think two handed is more fun than like a sword and shield is, or like a double sword is. But I think as the game goes on later, the two handed becomes a little bit less enjoyable, and then you can instead shift to like a sword and shield or to like a two dagger or whatever, a dual
Yeah.
blade, and that becomes a little bit more enjoyable. But it's pretty standard affair when it comes to melee combat in this game. Again, I don't think it needs to be super deep. I think a lot of RPGs a lot of
Does
the time aren't. So it
the melee combat does feel good. The enemies react if you like charge up your hammer or whatever. If you're using like a two-hander and you smack them, they'll like get pushed back, stuff like that. It's reactive enough where it's not like just like Skyrim is literally just hit, hit,
Yeah,
hit, hit, hit.
I don't know if we mentioned this, but but there's like a lot of hits done with it too. Like when you go to hit somebody, it feels like you're chopping through them because it takes a second. And that's something that
Yes,
always feels really good. And I think that's super important for games, right? Like if a game doesn't have that and there is melee combat, it it feels considerably less fun. It doesn't
yes.
like it's not as gratifying. Um, but yeah, I mean, the gameplay in the game, I think it's good enough. I don't think it's anything exceptional from a melee perspective. I didn't do bow. I did use a gun secondary, but the gun was probably the least fun thing
Hell
that
yeah,
I did.
brother.
Yeah, the gun was the reloading on it is just not fun. I don't like having to deal with that. But it's just the nature of the kind of guns that they have in that world. But yeah, I think it's solid. I mean, if we give a rating to story, I'll give one a to gameplay as well. I would have to say it's probably like a 7 out of 10. It would be nice if it was a little bit more engaging from a melee perspective. Um, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I thought it was good stuff.
I would say for Magic, I would give it like a solid 8, not like a close to a 9, but a solid 8 right in the middle. Um, I think I think it had enough variety, and I was able to have enough variance in my play styles. I liked using the environments around me to, like, if there was fucking enemies in a lake, or like in like a
Yeah.
pond in shallow water, you could like cast electricity on the pond, or you could I had a wand that had like an ice effect. So if I saw water, I would use my wand, just do a quick attack on it. It would freeze a portion of the water, and I would have like a platform to jump
Oh,
on.
that's really nice.
Um, Something we didn't mention, we talked about combat a lot before we move on to companions. I just want to mention this real quick. The movement in the game and the parkouring is wonderful. I think the movement in the game is great. And I don't think that gets talked enough about in RPGs like this.
Yeah, the game get so I'm basically gonna repeat what I said in the first impressions, in this regard. So you're absolutely correct, dude. The parkouring in the game is super, super fun, and I love the fact that the game gives you equipment that caters to that. There are
Yes.
countless pieces that are just like, hey, like you can parkour quicker, you get stamina regen quicker, things like that. And it really leans into that idea, and that's really fun. I love that a lot. It's one
Yeah.
thing to have good parkour; it's another to really cater to it. Um,
Moving out the world is fun and satisfying, and I think that's such a big part of that games miss nowadays, where the gameplay in this, like, even though it wasn't perfect, even though I didn't love it all the time, it never turned me off from the game, and it never was a hindrance on me like, continuing to get more of the story that I loved.
yeah,
Um, but with that, I think it's time to move on to companions. There are 4 companions in the game. You have Kai, you have Marius, a dwarf, dwarf like kind of ranger, I guess. Kai is like a sword and board kind of warrior guy. Giada is like a healer slash. Would you call her a mage? I don't. Maybe a spell sword kind of. But more heal, and then Yatsley, which is my favorite companion. She's a sassy
Yahtzee.
mage.
Yeah, I think Giada is strict she's like a mage, but she's strictly like support. I don't think she has
Yeah.
any combat abilities. Maybe she has one, but it's pretty much just supporting. Shield, heals, speed ups, things like that. That's really fun. Kai's supposed to be kind of like your tank. He has a ability where he jumps down and does like an AoE stun and pulls aggro when he does that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
he's got,
it
like, the AoE taunt.
it feels really weird. I'm not gonna lie, like having kind of like a short ranged tank uh character. Is a little strange, but it's fun nonetheless. It does feel kind of. I'm not gonna lie, like I felt like no real character fit that archetype of a tank, so I felt sort of inclined to be a melee because of that. Especially where later on in the game, when you get Giada, you get Yahtzee, you end up, you know,
Yahtzee.
they're ranged, and so you kind of have to be the one that's in front, tanking, dealing with everybody. Um, Honestly, they're all really
So I
fun.
don't I don't know about you, because I felt the same way, but I still liked it may just be because I like surrounding myself with women because 'cause I'm single and lonely, but I had, like, Giada and Yahtzee. As soon as I unlocked Yahtzee, those were my 2 companions, but I did have an ability, I think, in the ranger tree that lets you summon a bear,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that is what I would use as my tank because felt it matched, like, spellcaster, like, "Oh, and I'm, like, a godless or a, what's it called, for Sapidal, what are you?
You're a godless or an Ekida.
Ekida, oh, yeah, yeah, whatever it is, like, that's, like, your race or whatever. Um, but I felt that, like, matched the abilities of, like, oh, like, the god of nature, I should be able to summon a bear, obviously. And the nice thing about it too is I didn't have to put points into Ranger to get to it. It just unlocked when I hit level 15. Like, you could just get it and throw 1 point into Ranger and get that. I did that for, like, crit abilities in Warrior, crit damage in Warrior, and then crit rate in Ranger as well. But I mostly focused my skill tree in Magic. And I think that like my experience with that was like sick. It's like 3 basically mages and then a bear. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is a really fun comp. I will say that that's pretty much what I ran to. I think in the end, I didn't really care so much for Marius, and Kai to me was really fun to be around just because again, he was that Garrus voice actor. But yeah, Marius, honestly, I did not care about. They did a really poor job, I think, in really making you feel like you should care about him because a lot of his story didn't matter literally right up until the end of the game. And then like as you're going through the end of it is when you kind of get the last bit of like his quest finishing up and things like that. Up until that
Yeah,
point,
because
he's
the
basically just
last
moody.
zone is his home zone, and he's introduced as the second companion. So you're with him for like 2 whole chapters, and, like, there's really nothing to learn about him or grow with because he is a very, like, he's very, like, closed off, and doesn't, like, wanna, make friendships and stuff and that kinda thing, and, it explains it more. He's traumatized, all that kinda stuff, but it doesn't make for a um, character that I cared too much about. And by time I got to the end, I was like, well, he hasn't been in my party for 2 chapters, so I don't care.
Getting into like Giada too, I think with her, she was super interesting. I liked her backstory and everything with like her family. You eventually find out was like kind of screwed over by Sapidal. But just the character in of herself, a lot of the conversations that you had with her were really interesting. She was one of the more introspective characters. The one her and Kai would check in on you pretty regularly, which was really nice to see because it's not so much just like you know it's not just the world who's having to deal with it and us having to check in on them and be their therapist. It's like they're also like, "Hey, like, you're going through a lot, like, I get it. Like, are you
Yeah, like
good?"
you good, buddy? Yeah.
And that feels really nice to see. And then Yahtzee's just kinda like that wild card, she just kind of is, like, really scatterbrained and just, like, all over the place, but she's super fun to have around, and again, those 2 in conjunction, I think, make for the more interesting dialogue that you'll experience in the game, and then Marius is just like a brooding loser and, like, I don't care, so whatever. I don't ever feel the need to, like, have him around, but the other 3 are great in my opinion. I think when it comes to the
Yeah.
companions, uh, I think I would give them man, it feels like one character I just straight up don't like. I think the 3 companions are like a 10 and then Marius is like a 5. I just didn't care about him. I don't know what you would say
Yeah,
broadly, but
I was honestly gonna say like a 6 closer to a 7
what, for him or for everybody?
for everyone, for companions in general.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty fair because one of them is very much just like a detractor, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's probably like pretty safe to go with. I don't like halves. So I would say like, probably like a 7 if I'm talking about like them in general. But yeah, I think from there, man, I think we could just jump into some of the issues. I really only had 2. Again, like I said, I gave the game an 8 out of
We
10.
have 3. I know we don't have it written down, but we have 3. The game-breaking bug in the quest.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think they did fix that. But yeah, you're totally correct. Just like bugs and shit in general. Um, yeah, you know what? Let's start off with that. We have like 3 that we wrote down, but we'll start off with that one first. Yeah, I mean, like walk me through it, man. You dealt with it first,
I
and
forget the exact yeah, I, like, messaged you, like, almost quitting, like, the game. I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going again," like, da 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 da. Because I basically what happens is you go into an area, I forget the name of the quest, but you go into an area, I think in the 3rd zone, right before you confront Loudwin for, like, the first time for real, like, where you have an option to, like, fight her, um, and I had an issue where just like the quest wasn't progressing. Like a quest marker said, like, open this second door. And I got to the second door, I opened it, and I walked through it, and it still had the quest marker behind me and still said open the second door. It's like, okay, whatever, I can go forward. So I went forward. And the issue is in that dungeon that you're in, you enter and leave a few times, like you go into different areas. So there's an autosave every time. And by time I got to the end of that dungeon, my autosaves had moved past that point of that second door where that glitch happened for me. So I had to reload from a previous save, and it was like 2.5 hours prior. And I lost so much motivation. I was so mad. And then literally at 1 a.m. that night, I was like, fuck it. I like the game enough. I'm going to go back in. I'm just going to get back to where I was. And I did it again before entering the dungeon. I did a hard save, like all that kind of stuff. I got through it. I did have that glitch again, but I was able to work around it because it glitched in a different way where I was able to exit the dungeon because it wouldn't let me exit before, and I was just caught in a battle that was going on forever. Like it just kept respawning the enemies. There was new enemies coming in. Um, Eventually, what I did was I went and I hid, lost aggro, and then the door that's supposed to open up opened up. And I was able to move forward with that. You had a slightly different issue. It wasn't that exact one, but it was on the same quest.
yeah,
Correct.
I was just I thought when we spoke, I thought we experienced the same thing, or not spoke, but when we typed to one another. But yeah, no, we definitely didn't. It's the same quest, yeah, but it's just a little bit further on when I was speaking to Loadwin and Ring Room when you make the decision. on which way you're gonna who you're gonna go with. Um, for some reason, the dialogue would just like cut in the middle of it, and it would sort of like pan to nothing, and then it would bring you back to your character, and you can control them. And then you'd go to talk to what's her name, Ringram or whatever. I'm probably saying her name wrong, but you go to talk to her, and instead you start panning on again like just some random piece of scenery, and you hear like chants in the background for like 5 seconds, and then it brings you back to your character, and you just can't I can't progress further than that. And that happened to me. Like I reloaded it a little bit before it happened again. I reloaded a little bit further back, and I eventually got through it. But I can imagine somebody in that situation just being like super pissed because it's like, dude, what if I had to go even further back to
Yeah.
rectify that? So
And this was a I looked it up. Apparently, other people had the same issue that I did on that second door objective. Um, and honestly, because I couldn't get that second door objective, I didn't get any of the rewards from that quest, but I was able to move past it using other people's tactics of like going to hide and then waiting for the door to open. Then it doesn't even give you the right quest objective after you talk to Lodwin and Ringram. You have to like go find the person you need to talk to and advance that on your own to get the next quest started. And I ended the game with that quest. Open the second door, still in my quest log.
yeah, it's ridiculous, man. Um,
But you did say they fixed it in the most recent patch. There was a
well, I know
massive patch
I don't know.
recently.
I don't know. Maybe they
Um,
did. I'm not too sure. I could have swore I read something in the notes about my particular issue, but I again, like I thought we had the same issue. So I don't know if yours was fixed or not. But I would imagine if people are talking about it, it probably was. Um,
Yeah, I
usually
found I
game
found a
breaking
Reddit
shit,
post, and
you will.
there was multiple comments on it with people with the same issue, so it wasn't like a just me thing. Um, games are hard, especially open world games. I'm not going to hate on them too much for it, but it did almost make me quit. Luckily, they made a good enough game that I spent the 2 hours and got back to where I was.
Yeah, absolutely. But then like I mean that's it's sort of to say that like the bugs in general, they're really not too pervasive, but the ones that are there are like pretty damn big. But then to get into the next of the three issues, we'll probably just kind of run through these real quick, but like the animations in the game, I think in large part really are lackluster. Typically with double A games, I think if you look it up, it says it's a triple A game, but it does not have that feel. It feels still very much like a double A, like Outer Worlds was. But the animations in the game weren't too hot a lot of the time. They seemed really buggy. The characters really weren't all that emotive. Yeah, I don't know. It was a little disappointing to kind of see. Like I like a game that puts time and effort into when somebody's yelling, their character shows that, more so than just like their mouth opening a little bit wider, and that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe having their eyebrows move, maybe their arms kind of go crazy and things like that. It was a little
They did
disappointing to me. So
the one thing I will shout out, they did do a good job when Lodwin was angry, like the fire in her eyes would get brighter and shit. I thought that was cool.
that's where the
But I
budget
agree with
went.
you on like, yeah, 100%. But I agree with you like on everything else. Like it did feel a little. Not that I have an issue with that. And I think double A games like there should be more double A games. I think triple A is like running gaming honestly with the budget that they put into fucking textures and stuff. Um, as long as the game runs good and like has like a good art style, I don't care how 4K your textures are. If I can't run it at medium settings without lagging every 5 minutes. This game did a pretty good job of that. There was other things that you do notice where if they had more budget, they probably would have been able to fix it, maybe more time. But they were focused on other things.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing that I would say is a problem, and I think is a pretty annoying issue. And honestly, it's really nothing specific to this game. It's kind of just every like not every game. It's a lot of games. Is the enemy variety in this is pretty lackluster. You kind of see the extent of the majority of enemies that you're gonna fight in the first region, and like that group of enemies is pretty much the same throughout every other region in the game, with
Yeah,
just little sprinkles of variety here and there. But the vast majority of what you're going to be fighting are Zorps, bears, shroom guys. You're going to be fighting beetles, and that's pretty much it. Like that's 90, and then like humanoid things, right? So like
yeah.
think like a dream scourge or like a bandit. It gets to me this. You know what kills me is that it's like the game has dream scourge and it's corrupting people. Why can't we see like corrupted? everything else. Like the bear is, I think
That would be
you fight
sick.
one bear, but
Yeah, the Dream Scourge Bear at the beginning, like the catalyst for like you talking to Sapidol and stuff.
I
Um,
think that's it though. I don't think the Zorps ever have it. I don't think the Beatles do. I don't think, anything else does. There weren't
yeah,
any
I think you're
dragons
right.
in the game, which was kind of disappointing, or any sort of drakes at all. And if they are, it happened maybe once, and I didn't latch onto it. But from what I remember, it was just not the case.
So,
Uh,
question for you because you have a lot more experience with pillars than I do. Um, is there more enemy variety they could have used from the world of Aora?
I definitely think that the shroom people are new. I'll give them that. Um,
But like I know Zarups are in Pillars of Eternity, correct?
Yeah, they're in pillars. I don't know, like, a hard number on the variety, but I would definitely say it's, like, a hell of a lot more. There's just a lot more, like, fauna that you can fight in this or
Mhm.
in the pillar games. Um, but yeah, I think some of the issues you might find with bringing some of those enemies over from the other games is that maybe it just doesn't make sense in the Living Lands, but, like, that's where you get the opportunity to make some crazy shit, like oh, and spiders.
Exactly.
Spiders is something else you fight.
A shit ton of spiders, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like there's like lions in the other games. You could fight I don't know. I think the deer enemies you can kill a deer. They're in the game. I don't know if they're enemies, but you can definitely kill them. I don't know. There's like oozes and there's like these constructs that you can fight as well. I think they're actually called constructs. You can fight a lot of those enemies, but yeah, it was just disappointing. It just feels like when you set up a game in a brand new land, you have so much opportunity here to kind of just go crazy with it. It's something similar to the Mass Effect Andromeda game where it's like you're in a brand new universe, but like you're fighting the exact same shit. There's like really nothing crazy going on. You have all this opportunity there. You're just not necessarily taking it. It's something I wish they would have done. I wish they would have got a little bit crazier with it. There's probably budget constraints, time constraints, things like that. So it's
Yeah,
why it's
I'm sure modeling an enemy and developing new skills for them and stuff. I will admit with the Zarups, they did pretty well with like, oh, there's like, shaman Zarups that heal. There are Zarups that do like DPS. There's ranged ones. There's brutes. There's ones with shields. Like, but at the same time, that's also the same type of variation in the humanoid enemies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly, and that's all you're fighting. Like, you're like, there are variety in, like, the Zorps, but they're just Zorps, and that's it. But I think with that, that's pretty much all the issues I have with it. It's exactly why I would give it, like, an 8 out of 10. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think in that regard, man, I don't necessarily have anything else that I wanted to touch on unless you did.
I think we did a good job of covering everything. I know we have like miscellaneous up next, but I think we kind of touched on everything we wanted to.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, I mean, look, if you guys enjoyed this, please give it a like, subscribe, things like that. We're definitely gonna be
Oh,
pumping
did we
out
give a
more of
final
these.
grade? Or we did it at the beginning,
Yeah,
didn't
we
we?
started off with that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, if you guys like this video, please give it a comment, a like. Let us know what you thought about the game as well. I'm super interested. I love having those conversations in the comments. Um, but yeah, we're gonna be pumping out more of these coming up, a lot more variety coming up as we kind of narrow down exactly where we want to head. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys.
I love you too.